position.
So welcome back, everyone. Thank you for coming back. It's always a relief when people do come back. So let's move on and see what happens next in this saga. And thinking about the whole breaking open of stuff. Do feel free to come and go. It's not. There's no bars. Welcome. The thing about new things emerging, the pattern in life itself is always about a breaking open, sometimes a violent breaking open. Birthing is not a particularly comfortable process for those of you who've given birth. There's a breaking open. Parturition means letting go, separation. And there's something about the way we look at things. It's when, and we don't, is this whistling a bit? Is it okay? Can I do anything about it? Is that better? It's okay. We don't, I suppose the natural tendency is to surround ourselves with security so that we don't easily break. And we do that, I suggest, with our minds as well. We put a kind of shell around ourselves so that we are protected, and our attitudes, our values, which we've developed over time and over a lifetime, are not easily shifted. And when I think about how life forces or invites us to change our mindset, you may recall, not that you would have known him any more than I do, Einstein once said, you will never solve a problem with the same mindset that created it. And yet, that's the mindset we've got. Our mindset, the human mindset in the 21st century, is the mindset that created all the technology, set up all the defense mechanisms, all the good things and the less good things. That's what we've done with the mindset. And now we've got the problems that are arising with it. We won't solve them with the same mindset that created them, says Einstein. And it leaves me thinking about the mindset. A mindset, if you turn it the other way around, is simply a set mind. A mind that is, a child's mind is not set. The neurons are connecting and making new neural pathways all the time, depending on the child's experience. But we reach a stage where we get set. My elder aunt, I spent a lot of time with as a child. When I was in a romp, she would sometimes say to me, Margaret, be careful with a face like that. If you stay like that too long, you're set that way. And although my face wasn't set that way, but I sometimes wonder how far our mind set the way it was programmed. As soon as we go to school, our minds start to be programmed, and we get into we think it's the way things are and the way things should be, but actually it's the mindset that we've got. And sometimes it takes quite an intrusion or an invasion to break that open. Something happens. For instance, it was assumed until 3 years ago, that when you went to work, you went to the office in the morning and you came back, it was a 9 to 5 thing, you commuted. I was lucky, I actually worked in the 70s and 80s for International Computers, and we had a visionary woman called Hilary Cropper who got pregnant and had the idea that actually a lot of women, particularly, it wasn't just for women though, a lot of people had gone through expensive training and courses and so on, only to disappear when they had a child, and they couldn't work anymore, they couldn't come into the office because there was no child there. And she started a little movement in the company called Preggy Proggies. And it wasn't, you didn't have to be pregnant and you didn't have to be a woman. We had a sheep farmer who joined this thing. And she convinced higher management that it would work for people to work from home if they wished and if that was what their circumstances supported. And so those of us who availed ourselves of this were set up with a computer from the company. And higher management watched us like eagles because it was assumed that if we were once out from under their eye, we wouldn't do anything. So our productivity was very, very heavily monitored, and it was found to be higher than the people in the office settings. That was a long way ahead of its time. It was assumed until before COVID that the normal way of working is the 9 to 5 thing. You can be so. Now that mindset has been broken open, never to go back to how it was. So now there'll never be just that way of working. There'll always be at least hybrid ways of working. And so on and so forth. So sometimes it takes a blow from circumstance to change a mindset, to break open a set mind, to welcome new possibilities that you'd never thought about before. I always, when I was a child at school, when we talked about what we wanted to be when we grew up, I always knew that there was one thing I absolutely, always, consistently didn't want to be, and that was a teacher. I was absolutely sure that I wasn't going to be a teacher, and I'm not, and I never have become a teacher until 2020, when I found myself teaching my grandchildren, homeschooling them, and that was a bit of a blow to the system as well. But anyway, there we go. So the set mind, and sometimes it takes a crash to open it up to new possibilities. And we've had a few of those crashes now. So what's happening in that? Well, let's see what happens when the whole system breaks down, as in caterpillar world. And could it be that when our system, the systems that sustain us, the various systems, whether it's the change of didcot, which I now have got back in my memory, what happens when our memories start to disintegrate? And tell me I'm not the only one, please, that doesn't remember. I can remember, and I'm sure Isabel joined me at this, when we were 5 and we were joining in county primary school. I bet Isabel and I could tell you the names of at least half the children in our class. But we probably can't remember what we did last weekend. And we absolutely can't remember any passwords. When the system starts to break down in all kinds of ways, as we looked at earlier, what happens next in caterpillar world? Well, for them, I mean, they're obviously not working it out like we would be, but for them it's clear that there's no avoiding the end of the world. Caterpillar world is going to collapse, and that's it. Deal with it. Just what do? Curl up and die. Well, actually, what the caterpillar does at that point, they surprise themselves probably. It surprised me to learn this. They spin a little silk button, first of all, out of their own, whatever they use to spin thread, and then they spin this thread longer, and then they hang themselves upside down from a twig and settle down for a long wait. That reminds me very much of how it was in lockdown. We were told and encouraged, well, we were told to live differently, radically differently, and in a sense hang ourselves upside down by a thread into maybe not a silky bubble, but maybe a little bubble. Maybe some of you didn't even have a bubble. Those who were shielding and were really radically alone. Terrible, terrible experience. Many of us had a bubble. And all you could do was hang upside down from that twig and wait, settle down for the long wait. We didn't realise how long it was going to be. Anthony mentioned that I've got quite a lot of interest, and I'm not joined at the hip to the Jesuits by any means, but that wouldn't be a very comfortable place. But Ignatian spirituality and others, of course, encourage us to make retreats. And Ignatius himself introduced the long retreat, the 30 days in isolation or in a retreat centre, or 9 months in daily life. 4-month retreat that we were all pitched into, whether we wanted to go or not, during the first lockdown. So, hang yourself upside down in weight, but none of us thought, I didn't think it was going to be. I moved up to be with the family, because as I said, they were medics, and with 2 small children, they would not have been able to continue working, because they're isolated. Kids couldn't have gone anywhere. It wasn't possible. So I broke all the rules, not for the first time. Because Auntie Nicola in Scotland told us that godparents must not mix with grandchildren. So I promptly went up to Ayrshire and mixed with my grandchildren, not deliberately, perversely, but because that seemed to be the best way to get us all through this time. I could look after the children and my daughter and son-in-law could continue to work. It was a mission when they came home from work at different times, different shifts, but they had a little ante-room that they came in through the back door, stripped off their scrubs and everything, into the hot wash, themselves into the shower, the phone, the watch, everything got disinfected and scrubbed down, and as if they were going into the operating theatre, really. And it would be half an hour between them arriving home and us actually seeing them. They protected us very, very lovingly, actually. So I lived in a cocoon. We all lived in a cocoon at that time. The cocoon is a good image of it. And upside down from the tree. It's interesting that they hang themselves upside down. That's what babies do eventually when they're about to come. Most of them, there's always the awkward so-and-sos that come out bottom first. And that usually needs an obstetrician to intervene. But the ideal is that the baby goes head down into the birth canal. And it's just a throwaway remark, but I tend to think of that. The chrysalis hanging upside down, waiting for birth. But you can't speed birth up. Having said that, my daughter's an obstetrician. And she said, you wouldn't believe how many people now, maybe not in the past, but now, with a certain sense of entitlement, come into the clinics and say, I'm fed up with this, I'm feeling like at the beach where this is a 22 weeks gestation or something, silly, you know. Can you do a C-section? I want this over. Well, no, actually we can't. The baby's nowhere near ready, and that's not the way it works. But so, settling down from that long wait, you can't actually speed up gestation. Not by much anyway. You can obviously induce a birth if it goes over time. Excuse me. But you can't decide halfway through your pregnancy that you've had enough and you'll deal with it that way. So there they are, and they can't move, they're stuck there. There's nothing else they can do. We get stuck as well in our comfort zones, don't we? We don't want anything to move us out of them. So what will their attitude be? It might be curl up and die, this is it, just, what can we do? And there's a sense of that, especially as you get older, you think, I can't do anything, I'm helpless here, I can't influence anything. What do I do? Just sit and meditate and hope this will pass over? Or search for new life, be open to the possibility of new life. So I thought we'd just explore a bit, what's it like inside the chrysalis? Does any of that resonate with where we find ourselves now, you personally, individually, but us collectively, as community, our local community, our national community, our global community, and all Earth's community, all life on Earth. It's dark in there. It's dark inside the cocoon, the chrysalis. We are in the dark, I think. As I mentioned earlier, we're in the dark largely as to anything our politicians might be up to, or what's going on underground in various negotiations. We only hear what we're fed by the news media, and we're not, and half of that would be fake news as well. So, we don't know. We're in the dark. We're in the dark more than we were when we were younger, because there's more deliberate attempts, quite intentional attempts to keep us in the dark, to not give us the facts. And, you know, we have indeed been led in various directions through a web, which we can see easily with hindsight and could often see at the time, was a pack of lies and deceptions. But how do you change that? How do you stop that happening? We're literally in the dark. Some people are literally in the dark because they can't afford the electricity bills anymore. So people are not switching lights on, or finally learning to switch lights off, like grandchildren who didn't realise you have to pay for electricity. It's like my younger granddaughter, who's almost old enough to know better, I have to say, was delighted to comment to me last Christmas that it's so lovely that Santa comes and brings all these good things, because you can ask for anything and your parents don't have to pay for it. I nearly took her and said, you've got a few things to know, and I thought, no, you're not going to be the one that does this. That's a mum and dad job. So we have no idea what the future holds. We really haven't. The retreat centre I was in last week, like many others, most of my activities ended absolutely and abruptly on the 20th of March, 2020. That was it. As anyone else doing the kind of thing I was doing, and many other things that people were doing, just couldn't anymore. It ended. It was non-negotiable. It was over. And a lot of retreat centres never recovered from that. But those that have, and I'm not doing any overseas travel anymore, and I've made that decision before COVID because I decided that the planet needed to stay alive much more than anybody needed to hear me speak about anything. But that's easy at my age to say I'm not going to travel overseas anymore, fly anywhere overseas anymore. It's not so easy when you're young. I really do understand that. But it's interesting, the few contacts I have still now with retreat centres, there's one in particular I have in mind where they have the programme sorted 2 years ahead of time and approaching people and are you available and all this kind of thing. All very detailed planning. And now, the same person who did that detailed planning is so much more relaxed. I was amazed. You could visibly see the difference in it. And she said, you know, thank you for coming, and I'm sure we'll be asking you to come back, but, you know, I'm nowhere near getting next year's programme, and I'm not even worried about it. I said, that's the answer. We dance to the music of what happens. We don't try and predict what's going to happen tomorrow. We are all learning to live one day at a time, because that's how we have to live through COVID. So we don't know what the future holds. We never did, of course. It was always an illusion, but now we know it's an illusion. So we did, at the time when it all broke out, we went through at least, nearly a year, I'd say. Will there be a vaccine? It's hard to go back to that time now and remember the uncertainty of how serious is this thing? And, you know, millions globally were dying, and many others were having long-term, and still are, having long COVID. And there was a race for the vaccine. That was another change of mindset, wasn't it? Because, do you remember, pre-2020, it would take probably about 10 years to build a hospital, to get all the planning and the funding and everything. Suddenly it was possible to do it in 10 days. That was, whoa, what happened there? And the race to get the vaccine, regardless of whether you avail yourself of it, this is your choice, but the race to get to a vaccine was remarkable how quickly the scientific wheels went into motion. Now the uncertainty still continues, COVID continues, of course, it's not gone away, but now the question is, will Putin ever back off? What's going to happen in Ukraine? What happens to whole populations when suddenly civil war breaks out and from one day to the next, they have to leave family, friends, home, job, everything, with no sense of whether they'll ever go back. Not just in Sudan, but Syria, Afghanistan, all the other places. There's a real unknown we have no way of knowing. We are in the dark about how things may or may not progress in Ukraine, for instance, or in Sudan. Will we get to net zero in time? Big open question, and while we're debating how to do it, it's going to catch up on us, possibly. What's the next pandemic, people might be asking themselves. Are we prepared for it? That's a real question. But the on-the-ground question that people are asking and they're in the dark about is, will I actually be able to pay my bills this month? For many people, it's no longer budgeting what I'd like to spend, but what will I have to do now? Will I, I sometimes joke that, I said to as well yesterday, if my car needed refueling 3 times a day, I would sell it. Do I need refueling really 3 times a day? But people are making serious choices like that. What will we choose? Heating or eating, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of dark about, and it's very dark in the chrysalis. And in that way we can relate to life in the chrysalis. The next thing that happens in the chrysalis is its helplessness. There's a complete helplessness. You can't do anything when you're hanging on your thread like that. Waiting. We can't do a thing to help ourselves, or not much to help ourselves. We can't ourselves solve these problems. We can't solve the situation in the conflicts in the world. We can't single-handedly solve the climate crisis. There's a helplessness, an impotence in there, and yet we are all in there, and there is that within every one of us that holds some fragment of the future. Remember the imaginal self, that's the key. Between death and resurrection, there is the tomb time, and we're in there. Sometimes in Ignatian retreats, people will, if they're making a 30-day retreat, when they get to contemplating the time between Good Friday and Easter Sunday, they have a day when there's no organised events, there's no liturgy, there's nothing. They just give a packed lunch and told to spend time in the tomb, whatever that means for them, and reflect on what that feels like. So it's a kind of tomb time. But remember how close, etymologically, tomb is to womb. One word difference, one letter difference. And it's the same kind of enclosed space. A baby inside the womb would also think, this is terrible, I'm stuck here. Well, maybe it wouldn't. Maybe it thinks it's nice and cozy in here. I'm not leaving. And then comes the pressure and the labour pains start and it gets pushed out of its comfort zone. So that sense of being stuck in a small place that we can't influence, we are helpless, we are impotent. But actually, in terms of biology, the highest level, the most intense level of energy expenditure in the caterpillar cycle happens in the chrysalis when it appears absolutely nothing is happening. Just as they say that the greatest growth phase in a baby's brain, the human brain, happens in utero, when you can't see anything, or you might feel the odd kick if you're actually carrying the child, but we have no idea how all those neural connections, and then it continues through the first few years of life when everything is expanding and growing, and yet the child seems to be just playing. Nobody's teaching the child anything deliberately, not mostly. So the energy that's going on in the chrysalis is phenomenal, and yet we ourselves feel helpless. What energy is around? That would be a real question for a centre of spiritual growth. What energy is actually, how can we help to plug into that energy or amplify it in any way to help this helpless time be ready for when the time comes to emerge? We can't force that time. We look at emergence after lunch, but apart static and stuck. We are, the energy is still there. It's very much there, more than ever. Then the imaginal cells in that, because they are, remember, they are becoming active and they are developing inside the chrysalis. But they think they're alone until there are enough of them, because they keep multiplying. They start to pick up the resonance. Remember, they're defined as resonating on a different frequency, marching to a different drumbeat, you could say, from the rest of the caterpillar. And there's something, not that a few chosen people on the planet are the ones, the prophetic ones who are going to bring this to birth, but there's that in everyone, I suggest, that is marching to a different drumbeat, that's saying, okay, I'm living my life, I'm doing what you do in life, you build your houses, you do your job, you cook the dinner, you get the kids from the school run, and so on and so forth. All that needs to go on, but there's something else going on as well inside each of us, especially if people who are consciously aware of it. They're saying, but there's more. There's something brewing. I'm part of something bigger than myself. But I'm a unique and indispensable part of that something bigger. And that's the imaginal cell, I suggest, within us. And then beginning to pick up the resonance from others around us. The imaginal cells in the chrysalis pick up the resonance from other imaginal cells. And then, hey, I'm not alone with this. I'm actually not alone. Isn't it, the feeling when you meet a like-minded person, you have a conversation with someone who's really on your wavelength and you on theirs. It doesn't mean your wavelength is the right and only wavelength. It means you've connected, this resonance. Other people will connect with others and find that resonance. And it's so life-giving when that happens. And it's happening inside the chrysalis. And I suggest it happens in human terms, in groups like yourselves, where there is thinking going on and sharing and discussing and reflecting. This is the resonance actually picking up other resonances. I saw a different example of this. I spent some part of my adult life working and living in Berlin, in Germany, obviously in the west part of Berlin, but my main connections with people I knew and was connected with was all with the East, with the East Berlin, because that's how it was. And so I went over to East Berlin frequently and to visit. And it happened, I wasn't there at the time of what they call the Wende, the change, the change that came in when the wall came down and the communist dominance in Eastern Europe fell apart, disintegrated. But I'm told that there were cells of dissidents, of people, well, there were more than cells. Most people, I think, didn't really like the way things were in communist East Germany, but you couldn't speak out because it was a police state. It's like the Russians now. They may well think they really don't want to be fighting their neighbours, but speaking out can cost you very, very dearly in a dictatorship. We are so lucky to be able to say what we think about our leaders. As long as, well, even if it is slandered, I'm not suggesting we should, but you can say anything almost on social media. Not that I would, and thankfully that's starting to be closed down when people get abusive, but it's hard to imagine that living with the consequence of imprisonment and torture and death, not just for yourself but for your family, you learn to keep quiet in a dictatorship, you really would. But they started to gather. It's like the imaginal cells picking up, but I'm not on my own with this. This is, other people are feeling like this. And they started to meet together in little groups. Mainly, it happened in church halls. Because in East Germany, unlike in some of the other Eastern European countries, faith practice wasn't completely banned. It was frowned upon and it was mocked and so on, but it could carry on to some extent, so the church halls were still available. And people gathered in small groups and started to mutter about, what can we do? We can't do anything, we're helpless. There was some passive resistance as well, some wonderful examples. I think there was a case, I was told there was one evening at the Opera House where the piece of music concerned was the March of the Hebrew Slaves. Is that from your book? I think it is, yeah. And you can't stand up and shout, yeah, that's what you get off our backs, but the entire audience stood in silence through that piece of music. They couldn't lock them up for standing. It could have been a standing ovation. But actually, it was a standing silence. A Quakerly thing to do, actually. To stand and not use any violence, but make a point that wasn't easily forgotten. So this is the kind of example of people picking up the resonance of others who are also sensing, yeah, it looks awful all around us, but something's going on here. There's some other energy at work here. Christians might call it the energy of the Holy Spirit. Others who are not within a church or haven't grown up through a faith tradition might use other terms, but maybe it's just language. But there's something around that makes us want to connect to others on our wavelength and wants to share this sense of something waking up. It feels all melting down, but what's waking up? What's coming to birth? And there's no answer to that, so don't even ask. But don't ask me. But there's that sense around. And then the people that do that reach a tipping point eventually, as they did in East Germany. And eventually, and that was through an amazing accident. I love these accidents when stuff happens because somebody gets something wrong and somebody misinterpreted some message from on high about opening the borders. And there was never any concerted decision that said, okay, we've done that now, we're finally going to open the borders. And all the people that take credit for it, I would give the credit to Gorbachev more than anyone else, but it happened through an accidental breakdown of communication, that somebody accidentally misunderstood, that I think the message was there might be some partial opening of a border with all kinds of conditions attached, and somebody got the wrong end of that stick. And suddenly, it wasn't that simple, but it was an accident really. And once that happened, everything came tumbling down, as you remember, 1989. So and because that brings people together, remember, no imaginal cell holds any more than one fragment, one particular part of the future butterfly. If they don't come together, there'll never be a butterfly. This is a communal journey we're on. The entire human family is on this journey. It's not about one person. If any one person thinks they can save the world, I think that's called in the trade a messiah complex. It's not to be encouraged because it doesn't work. It's going to somehow, in ways we don't yet understand, it's going to be about bringing those precious parts, that's like putting a mosaic together with precious fragments in everyone, coming together, sharing, connecting, and I don't know, like a jigsaw, I suppose, in a way, but that's perhaps not the best analogy. The future butterfly is gradually being formed. You can trust that. You don't have to. We may be completely wrong. Maybe there is no spiritual evolution going on, but I stake my life on the fact on the possibility that there is. I'm not the first one to talk about any of this. Pierre de Chardin is your man to go to if you want to study it in more depth. And there are commentators on him that are very, very helpful. He said long before his time, and he was discredited by the Church and the Jesuits in particular for what he said. But he was all along trying to broaden this out, saying this isn't just about doing a certain thing on a certain day in a certain way. This is so much bigger. And a lot of the system at the time wasn't very when he died, they didn't give him a proper funeral. Normally it would have been a big celebration, but they just buried him. And I have to say, by accident, I found that place. I was delighted. I really was like a kid in a candy store. I was in New York, or New York State, in a retreat centre there. It was way back. And the sisters said to me, lovely sisters they were, I've met some wonderful people in religious life, really fabulous, especially because I've met more women than men, because I've stayed in more convents and monasteries. I can only say there are some fabulous women around. Could easily be CEOs of big organisations, but that's an aside. So when the retreat finished, they said, Margaret, now we're going to have a fun day, we're going to take you out. So I thought, oh that's nice. And the next day said, it's a surprise, we're going on a mystery tour, but we can tell you, at the start of the day, they said, well, we're going to eventually take you to the CIA. And my heart absolutely sank. There's no way I want anything whatever to do with the CIA. For a start, I didn't have a green card or a work visa or any kind of permission. No, what are they thinking of? These wise sisters, what on earth are they thinking of? No! I said, I don't, forget it. No, they said, you'll enjoy it. I said, I won't. Anyway, up we went, up the Hudson River, and about 2 hours on, and we came to a place called the Culinary Institute of America, which is an amazing place. There was that, I don't know if it still exists, and the students there, they had 4 different restaurants, and the students ran everything. They planned everything, they did all the cooking, they did the waitering, and so on, and everything, the budgeting. That's where they were learning, and it meant that you could have really great meals there at quite modest prices. Anyway, that's where we went for lunch. And that was the start of it, but at the end, after we'd eaten, one of the sisters said, now just come with me. And she went to the reception desk, and she said, could I have the key, please? And she was handed over this ancient kind of key thing, big key. And she took me to behind this place, where there was a walled garden, and she opened this rickety old gate, and we went into this place, and I didn't know where we were going. Is this the dessert? And that was where Théo de Chardin was buried, and it was just a very insignificant little stone among all the others, just with his name and his dates on, like every other, like a little slab. But it was surrounded, not just his, everywhere, but it was surrounded by daffodils. It was Easter. I think he died, if I'm not mistaken, he died on Easter Day as well. I think it was. So lots of people have talked about the possibility of spiritual evolution, not least Jesus from Nazareth. There's more. You are not yet finished. my daughter, back in the day, when she was very small, and she'd done something, some minor misdemeanor, and incurred my wrath. But we went out together down to the shops or down into town, and we were in a bookshop. No surprise there, because I live in bookshops if I get a chance. And she had a bit of spending money. She must have had, although I don't remember giving her any money at the time, but she did. And she bought a little card, one of these little card things. And I didn't know, I didn't really see her buy it, I don't know how it happened, but she came home and presented me with this card. And it was a picture of a kitten standing in a pool of milk alongside an upturned saucer. And the caption underneath it said, please be patient, God hasn't finished with me yet. Oh dear, my heart melted. And she put a nice message on the back. So sorry, Mummy, we'll do it again, kind of thing. But that's true. Whatever's going on, we're not finished yet. We are a work in progress, individually and collectively, I suggest. And that's kind of the bottom line for me of what faith would be, trusting that there's something going on, something more. So, going back to the Chrysalis briefly, what else is in there? Total instability. Nothing is predictable. And yet the wisdom of chaos theory says right down in the heart of that mess, something very predictable is going on. The strange attractor is at work, drawing forth a new pattern, a new possibility. Right down there in the depths of the chaos, there's a possibility, there's a new vision coming to be. And we can't see what it is, because it's dark, as we saw. And it's unpredictable. And never trust anyone who thinks they can tell you what it's going to be. Anybody who's got the answers has gone down a cul-de-sac, frankly, I think. So don't ask me any questions, because I'm not yet in the cul-de-sac. But the last thing to mention about the chrysalis time is obviously the butterfly effect comes into this. And that's another scientific thing that is true, it's a fact. The butterfly effect, put rather poetically, says if a butterfly flaps its wings in Singapore, say, then it might cause a hurricane in San Francisco. That's it in a nutshell. And it sounds, that's somebody being quite fanciful. That's ridiculous, of course that couldn't happen. But the underlying science of it is that an initial change, a slight change in initial conditions, as tiny as might happen to the change in air pressure, for example, by the flap of an insect's wings, a tiny change in air pressure, as tiny as that, can, through feedback loops, get bigger and bigger until it causes a huge change in air pressure on the other side of the planet. And that is, I think, really fascinating. It has something important to tell us. It's also the basis of weather forecasting, which is also not terribly predictable. The only problem with the Met Office is that they don't seem to have any windows, not in the northern way. But hey, I love cats. Sorry, I'm giving away my way of spending my breakfast morning, my morning coffee. But Carol on Breakfast on BBC, she's lovely. Love her. She's always got a smile. If you're not into watching Breakfast, I'm sure you've got better things to do at that time. But those of you who haven't, listen, just let Carol smile over you. She always brings terrible news. It's really awful weather, and it's pouring all over the place. But she always does it with such a nice smile that you think, oh, it's okay, we'll get through this. Anyway, never mind Carol, she's not here today. But a small change in initial conditions can create a massive change elsewhere. And it sounds very, very unlikely. And the way that it happens, and I don't understand the dynamic of this either, but my simplistic layperson's not scientific understanding of it, is that a feedback loop starts. So it starts to grow, snowball you could say. So that little change in air pressure goes through a feedback loop which makes it a bigger change in air pressure until it crosses all the oceans and plays havoc somewhere else. Feedback loops, it seems to me, are very important, and they can be negative or positive, and we are all involved in feedback loops, I think. So if you imagine an example of a negative feedback loop would be, let's take ourselves back to the Stone Age. It's a nice safe place to go, and we're living in a cave somewhere in the Thames Valley. Always, as soon as I say Thames Valley, and as soon as I ever go into Oxford Station, I see Inspector Morse running up and down the steps. But imagine, if you can, a valley with caves in it, and a little group of hunter-gatherers has made a home in one of the caves. And that's working out quite well because there's a food supply. There seems to be enough mammoths or woolly mammoths or bison or whatever they live on, and they can go out and hunt, and they've got in their small group, they've got their social systems worked out and so on. And it's fine. But then they look out the cave one day and they see another group coming through the valley, walking about the same size as they are, obviously looking for another cave to live in. Now what happens next? What could happen next is the first group start to mutter to themselves, what do they want? What are they doing here? Coming across crossing little boats across the channel kind of thing. We were here first. Are they going to settle here? Are they going to tap into our food supply? Is there going to be enough for all of us? Are they going to start going after our mates? This doesn't look good. We feel suspicious, just suspicious, that this might not be going to end well. So, next stage in the feedback loop is, well, just in case, let's pile up a few stones, in case they turn hostile and start to attack us. Just a few stones. The other group that's walking along the valley sees this, was happy enough until they saw the stones, and then thought, oh dear, the natives are not very friendly here. So if we're going to settle here, we can do, but we'd better have our own supply of stones as well. So up goes another pile of stones a little bit bigger. So the original inhabitants see, yeah, we told you, we were right to suspect them, look, they're going to attack us, they're getting the stones ready. More stones go on. And so we go back to what I mentioned earlier, mutually assured destruction. That's a feedback loop, and you could call it the arms race. The more you build up your weaponry, the more the other side, there aren't any sides of course ultimately, but the enemy, the perceived enemy, will build up their supplies as well. And so it carries on, and that feedback loop can easily, very easily end in total war. So one thing going wrong somewhere in the diplomatic corps, somebody saying something that offends somebody else, can easily escalate, and that would be a negative feedback loop. I see it, I have to say, and I feel with people because it would be, I'm not in that position, but it would be so easy if you are speaking publicly about things, the affairs of the nation, to say, without thinking, just an off-the-cuff remark that somebody takes exception to, and with some justifications, with some recent examples. And you can see why people would take exception to that, but I can also see how somebody could throw that remark out without ever thinking about, and oh my goodness, what have I said? Yes, no, I didn't really mean it that way. Their friends, they're the ones who get the whip removed from them. They're the ones who get suspended. But we can have a leader who tells us a pack of absolutely obvious lies, leads us into all kinds of trouble, and nobody ever questions it. Interesting, isn't it? So, but same on social media or in ordinary human interaction. It's so easy to say something accidentally, or, not meaning any harm, but somebody else picks it up and it pushes their buttons in some way, and you can start a whole feedback loop of negativity. But the same thing works in reverse, positivity. I was with a friend in a cafe once, and a group of us, and the waitress was such a grump, was so unwilling, and to have to get your coffee, and coffee and home. And then she went off to get whatever we'd asked for eventually, and we, the group of us, muttered as well. So, my goodness, what a joyful soul she is, And one person in our group said, to her great credit, I'm sitting here thinking, she might have had a really rotten day. She might have had a diagnosis of some disorder that she's really anxious about. She might have someone in the family who's in some kind of trouble. She might have just had bad news. And that comment turned our conversation around and made us all feel a bit guilty, because you start to think, actually I've never seen that. I've never thought to look underneath the surface. It's just a grumpy waitress. But behind that grumpy waitress is a story as a human person who's got all sorts of stuff to deal with. That feedback loop then meant that we, when she came back, were more friendly to her and thanked her sincerely for what she brought. it may be, I can't never followed it through, it may be that made her feel a little bit better. So that the next people that she served, she wasn't quite so grumpy, possibly. That's a positive feedback loop. And we can all engage. We all do engage. I'm sure many of you have had the dubious displeasure of being close to or living with or working with someone who seems to suck the energy out of the room, you know, real negativity. The kind of, you start saying, lovely day today. Oh, but if you see the forecast, you know, that kind of person. We all know them. But we also know that there's other people who come into the room and radiate energy into the room. You feel more energized by being simply with them in the same room. And it's our responsibility to make sure, I think, that we don't become the start of a negative feedback loop or magnify it, amplify it because we've had it passed on to someone else. But we can, I think, be the start and the amplification of positive energy. In the end, we can't solve the Ukraine problem, we can't deal with Sudan, we can't deal with Putin, we can't deal with climate change really. But we are only one cell in this process. But that one cell, the butterfly effect tells us, has an amazing power. I call it the power of one. Because we are not zero, each one of us is one. And added together, I keep naming Putin, and I really don't understand what's going on in the background there and what the history behind it and all of that. So I'm not trying to demonize the guy, he does enough of that for himself. But a one person causing havoc at the top of the pyramid, the power pyramid, is only, after all, one person, but has enormous power in the worldly sense of power over. But there are billions of us, ordinary folk, getting on with their lives. And if you add together all the energy in those billions, it amounts to far more than what one can do. So our power of one is not to be forgotten. We too can be the start, the flap of the butterfly's wings, simply by changing a tiny change in initial conditions. It can be as simple as smiling at someone instead of walking straight past them. Or saying, if you meet somebody out on a walk somewhere, or even in the street, perhaps not so much in the city, it doesn't matter, but it does in the villages. And the person greets you and says, good morning. And you respond with a good morning. That's kind of being the power of one in the ordinary things of life. And because there are so many of us, that's going to make a huge difference through all the amplification to bring good things to birth, and not destructive storms, but good fruits to bear elsewhere. So what I'm saying in all of that is never underestimate the power of one. And once we went through a period of redundancy, and we had many actually over the years, and I had a card once from someone, somebody we knew, who lived in the Czech Republic, still does. And he sent us a little card, and it said on it, I am only one, but I am one. There is very little I can do, but the little I can do, I will do. And that meant a lot, you know, that just that somebody's there with you, sharing good energy with you. So let's never forget that power of one. The butterfly effect is very real. And what we can add to the world seems minimal, like a butterfly flapping its wings. But it has the power to change things dramatically. And I hang on to that. It's hard, because there's a lot of the opposite. But let's lose sight of the fact that it is in our power to make tiny changes that might have very big consequences. So I'm going to leave it there. I'll leave it to Stuart, because it's over lunch, but not quite lunch yet. And after lunch, we'll see what happens when the butterfly emerges, because that tells us a lot about what we might become and how that might show itself in human life. But right now, for about, how long have we got? Sorry, I should have stopped at 12:15. Sorry, folks, I'm really sorry about that. But this time